I call Alfred Ngaro.
Well, it was a very interesting speech, and truly to the name of Mr. Clayton Mitchell, it was a Clayton's. It promised all the punch. It was a placebo in disguise, because at the end of the day, he votes for it. New Zealand First will vote for this bill, and the only reason why we had that speech that attacked the government on all different sides was just so that he could justify the fact is that, yes, we're voting for it. However, we do have concerns. Mr. Speaker, if you've got to vote for it, vote for it. Support it wholeheartedly. Don't get up and be half-hearted. Don't like when you're going to have a bit of a bet, you have one each way. That's right, 1 foot this way. I'll have one on the win and one on a place. Just in case the horse doesn't get through, right, Mr. Speaker, you take one each way. Mr. Speaker, what we are about over here on national, in government, is actually about making decisions. Making decisions and turning around and saying, actually, we're putting it all on the nose. We're going ahead. We're going to support the bill. Yes, we've had some concerns. We've heard, we've listened, but we've believed this is the right thing to do. And Mr. Speaker, here's the tell of the tale, right? Because the fact is, most New Zealanders have turned around and said, actually, this is the right thing to do. This is the right thing to do. Mr. Speaker, this is what this bill is about. It's about extending trading hours, simply and quite clearly. The sale and supply of alcohol, extended licensing hours during the Rugby World Cup is about extending those hours. I want to acknowledge Mr. Seymour, Mr. David Seymour that's here. He's put this bill up, and also too, there's been great support. We know there's been support because even when the Greens turned around, they did the old flip-flop. First they were against it, then they had to go for it. They went for it because even their own supporters turned around and said, don't be haters. Don't be haters. Don't be joy killers. Instead, what you should be doing is supporting this bill. So what did they have to do? And the very next day, Mr. Speaker, they had to retract when the leave was put forward, they had to retract their opposition. Instead, they had to vote for it. And so they did. They've gone into the select committee, and yes, Mr. Hague was there. He heard the submissions, but again, he's come out fighting again. Why? Because it wasn't quite where they wanted to be. He's talked about the rhetoric, about the concerns, and I think, Mr. Speaker, that's going to do some damage to their brand. Because at the end of the day, this is about extending trading hours. It's giving an opportunity which is part of the celebration of who we are as being Kiwi. It's part of the All Blacks, Mr. Speaker. That's what it's actually all about. So we know that the Rugby World Cup is the third largest sporting event in the world. 2011, we made concessions. In 2011, we hosted the Rugby World Cup, and what a great occasion it was. And I know that before the dinner break, Mr. Penehinere was actually talking about some of that celebration. In fact, I'd like to acknowledge, if it wasn't for the Tongan community who came out, who gridlocked the Auckland International Airport, there was a sea of red. The colour may not have been right, but the passion was, Mr. Speaker. That's what was there. There was great passion that was there, and what they did, they celebrated, Mr. Speaker, the welcoming of their team coming in, and they had brass bands, and they turned around and they said, this is great, this is for our community. And Mr. Speaker, you see, this is what the medium of rugby will allow us to do. Even small communities, like our Tongan community, like the Fijian, and even like the Samoan community, who are out there and their teams are being able to be celebrated. New Zealand is a diverse culture of people. And inside of that, Mr. Speaker, rugby has become one vehicle, a very powerful vehicle for them to be able to acknowledge, to celebrate, and also for their young men and women to be able to excel in sports and also travel the world as well. We think it's a great thing to do. Mr. Speaker, I also too want to put on record about the Parliamentary Rugby World Cup, and Mr. Mallard will know about this. 1995, Nelson Mandela, Mr. Mallard will remember that, the letter that was sent. And here's the reason why. The nation of South Africa wanted to not only celebrate and host that World Cup, but also too wanted to say, through Nelson Mandela's words, let's invite the world to come to us. They put the invitation out to all the different parliaments. That's right. That's right. Something about the food, Mr. Mallard. But what they did is that the invitation went out to all the different parliaments of the world to come and use the medium of rugby to be a way of uniting the nations together. London, South Africa, we know what the story is, okay? Don't destroy the story there, Mr. Mallard. Don't destroy the story. Here's the legend. Nelson Mandela came from Damien O'Connor. He told us the story. Okay, he told us the story. Damien O'Connor shared it with us. Nelson Mandela welcomed all these different parliamentary teams, and it was through the medium and the sports of rugby that would allow the nations to be united for one place and one time. What a great story. What a great place to be able to do it. And here again, rugby is a medium to be able to allow us to be able to exercise that great ability as well. So, Mr. Speaker, so here's some of the bits of the bill that I think are also very important. So we heard in the Select Committee how that around the special licensing, and there's a lot of acronyms here, DLCs, LAPs, okay? So the district licensing committees. And here's an opportunity where in the hands of those communities, we're not removing that ability for those DLCs with their LAPs, their local alcohol plans, okay? To be able to put those plans together and so they can work there. Now, we also realised that some of them actually hadn't put those plans together. So here was a chance for them to be able to put into place local alcohol plans that would address some of the issues of concern. Yes, it's about the binge drinking. Yes, it's about the hours, even about noise control as well, Mr. Speaker. So we think those things were important. So submitters expressed their belief that special licences negated the need for the bill. However, DLCs, the district licensing committees, concerns were raised that some licensing committees were requiring license to provide complementary entertainment. In other words, they made it slightly difficult for them to be able to receive their licenses. We think that this bill will be important to addressing those issues as well. Mr. Speaker, there was also a concern around eligible games. At first, in the journey of that Select Committee to be able to hear submissions, we thought, well, let's restrict those. In fact, it came directly from the Green Party. Well, we'd vote for it if we could restrict those games to around about 16. Around about 16 games. Why? Because then you could do 4 pool games, and then maybe 12 other games that could allow you to have 16 games that were in there, semis, quarters, and also the finals. But Mr. Speaker, we then sort of said, we went back and we discussed this, that would be discriminatory. That actually wouldn't allow for some of the smaller nations like Tonga, like Fiji, like Samoa, who've got different pool games. Why not we make this eligible for all 48 games? And so, Mr. Speaker, we believe that that's important, that this will enable licensing to open up for all matches during the Rugby World Cup, and we think that's important as well. The other areas too is around that Mr. Haig made the point around they'll just buy a little TV, maybe a 20-inch sort of flat screen, put it in a corner, and they'll be able to do that. Mr. Speaker, we know that it's really clear that it clarifies in this bill that the games must be a live audio-visual feed, not delayed or replayed, and the displaying of those licensing conditions also make it important in this bill as well. Mr. Speaker, I think one of the things that's important that has been raised by Mr. Mitchell was around the binge drinking. We know that controlling them, Mr. Speaker, just by putting more constrictions and regulations are not part of that, but instead it's by role modelling and having good behaviour. So trading hours becomes really important to this issue. In short, the committee has made the trading hours more workable. The bill as introduced specifies that the licence would have their licensing hours extended for 1 hour before and 1 hour after a game that they have broadcasted outside normal licensing hours as well. Mr. Speaker, I want to touch on the issue of noise management, and we know that there's some concerns because of the odd hours where some of these licensed facilities may be, Mr. Speaker, around noise control. Again, wanting to make sure that we didn't, burden our communities. The noise management has given the extension of licensing hours so that the committee has recommended that there's no discarding of empty bottles during extended hours or use of outdoor courtyard areas as well. Mr. Speaker, just a final few comments that I'd like to make to this bill in my speech, Mr. Speaker. That I think one of the areas also too was around the one-door policy, one-way door policy. We know that there are a number of people who will frequent a number of other liquor licenses and premises. So we wanted to make sure that many licensed premises are subject to the one-way door policy as conditions of their license or as implemented by their local alcohol policy as well. While there are generally good reasons for one-way door policies where they apply to premises, they do not fit well with the intent of this bill. Mr. Speaker, we've had this bill come through. Yes, it's been a truncated process, but the intent has been right. I want to acknowledge Mr. Seymour, and he's come through. I know there was some comment about his bill being like a magnadoodle, that he had to shift and change in some ways. I think that's part of the process of ensuring that we could get enough support in here to make sure that this bill, at the end of the day, is around celebrating, I suppose, the culture of rugby, and also that's part of New Zealand culture, the opportunity for New Zealanders who can't go to the World Cup but still celebrate that, to extend the trading hours under the sale and supply of alcohol extended licensing hours. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill and support this bill to the House.
I call